So let's talk about what a worthless liberal is. What makes them liberal? And this is not any specific like definition. It's just my understanding of the topic, and why I refer to these people as liberal is because they're very reactionary. They're very status quo. So how can you label yourself a progressive, which by definition means you're moving forward or making progress? You're not. You are a liberal. You are fine with the overall structure of the status quo, like 99% of it, but you just want to make a couple of tweaks, a couple of changes here on the fringes. So that is the liberal part. Now, we already know Western. We're basically talking about white European countries. We're talking about United States. We're talking about France. We're talking about Britain, these types of countries. And then what makes them worthless is the point that is made by Caitlin Johnstone, and I think she makes it very well. So I'm going to let her answer that point. It's a lot of what we've said a lot here. All of the members have said about a lot of these, what we call social democrats. We call them social democrats. In this segment, they're being labeled Western liberals. They refer to themselves as progressives or progressive Democrats. So all of those words are the same person. So let's listen to Caitlin. I might stop it here and there, but for the most part, I want to let it play. It's not long at all. It's like 5 minutes. So
on Palestine and the worthlessness of the Western liberal. There's an infuriatingly common type of liberal who purports to oppose Israel's actions in Gaza while also saying they support Israel's right to exist.
This very first out of the gate point she makes, is what makes them worthless. If on one hand you are saying pour this and let's get this person food and this, and then you turn around and give money and weapons to the person who put that person in that humanitarian crisis, what does that mean? You're worthless. You're playing both sides of the fence. That's what makes them worthless. So I hope I define now with that little snippet, that little first little part of this article. It's an audio article to define worthless Western liberal. Worthless because they're playing both sides. Western because of where we're at, the United States and other Western countries, white countries. And then liberal, they're not progressive because they're very status quo. So that's what we're addressing, regardless of what they call themselves. So I rewind it back, and then I'll let it play.
There's an infuriatingly common type of liberal who purports to oppose Israel's actions in Gaza while also saying they support Israel's right to exist, as though Israel's existence is somehow separable from its genocidal murderousness. This is a state that literally cannot exist without nonstop violence and tyranny, as demonstrated by its entire unbroken history since its inception. It was set up as a settler colonialist outpost for Western imperialism from the very beginning, and that's exactly what it's been ever since. History has conclusively established that it is not possible to drop an artificial ethno-state on top of an already existing population, in which the pre-existing population is legally subordinate to the new one, without tremendous amounts of warfare, police violence, mass displacement, apartheid, disenfranchisement, and oppression. This is not actually debatable. It is a settled matter, no pun intended. Is it possible to have a nation in which Jews are welcomed and kept safe? Of course. Many such nations exist outside of Israel, and the majority of the world's Jews live in them. What isn't possible is a Jewish ethno-state in historic Palestine in which the pre-existing population is treated as less than the Jewish population. That does not necessarily entail nonstop violence, tyranny, and abuse. This is self-evidently a direct contradiction in goals, but it's what the liberals we're discussing here pretend to believe is a reasonable possibility. There absolutely could be a state in that region wherein Palestinians and Jews coexist peacefully, but it would be so wildly different from present day Israel that you can't pretend it would be the same state as the one we see now. It would entail such a radically dramatic overhaul of Israeli civilization, such a comprehensive dismantling of deeply ingrained racism, such a drastic restructuring of governmental and living systems, so much labor, sacrifice, humility, inner work, and reparations, that to call it by the same name as the state that presently exists would be nonsensical. And that isn't what the liberals in question are talking about instituting when they say they oppose Israel's atrocities in Gaza but support Israel's right to exist. What they are saying is that they want Israel to remain the unjust and tyrannical apartheid state that it has always been, but for the killing to stop. They want the injustice.
Yeah. So you get just the inherent position of the social democrats, the liberals, the progressive democrats of saying Israel has the right to defend themselves, and then saying poor Palestinians, forget the point I was making. Oh, hang on, let me listen to this one more time.
And tyrannical
Shouldn't have read that comment. I'll put it up in a second.
Apartheid state that it has always been, but for the killing to stop.
Right. So they want to keep in place the apartheid state, but just make the apartheid state more livable. So if you want to put it in the context of the United States, they would have been the people who saying, let's keep slavery, but let's give them better housing. Let's keep slavery, but let's give them 2-hour lunch. It's wanting to keep the how is that an effective ally? How is that standing in solidarity to say, I want to keep the overall structure the same, which is Israel has a right to defend himself, but let's make it a little more humane. That is what essentially what all of these Western liberals are arguing. Everybody on that graphic that we have. Well, let's get back to the video. I'll put that comment up. That threw me off in just a second here.
They want the injustice to continue, but they want its most overt manifestations to stop causing them cognitive dissonance. They want the status quo without the murderous savagery that is necessary for the status quo's existence. They want to protect.
It's the same. This is the same sort of position, cowardly sort of position that is the issue with social democrats. It's the same sort of framing they give to the unhoused population, as you saw on TYT with Anna, and they're attacking. It's that they just wanted out of sight. They want the killings. They want the atrocities not to be as such, so that it's out of sight. They're fine with the apartheid state. They're fine with that part. Let's continue. I'll play a little bit more. There's about 2 minutes left, and then we get to the rest of the presentation.
Pretend they live in an imaginary fantasy land where such a thing is possible. In order to make this fantasy seem more believable,
I'm going to rewind it. So this last point she's making is a little bit more coherent.
But they want its most overt manifestations to stop causing them cognitive dissonance. They want the status quo without the murderous savagery that is necessary for the status quo's existence. They want to pretend they live in an imaginary fantasy land where such a thing is possible. In order to make this fantasy seem more believable, liberals will pretend that the violence we are seeing can be blamed entirely on the Netanyahu government, as though things would be fine without Bibi in office, despite the fact that Israel's abusiveness began long before he showed up.
Correct. I mean, how many different prime ministers have overseen the killings of people of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza? So and I said this many times, I can't remember which stream, So for progressive Democrats, this is what they're leaning on because this is what's acceptable in establishment, and they understand they have boundaries. This is what progressives are very keen on, boundaries that is allowed by the establishment. Ro Khanna is very keen. He's one of the best at that. He understands how to make an establishment's point of view sound a progressive, for example. But let's listen a little more because I want to get to his actual interview.
And despite the fact that Israel's atrocities in Gaza have the approval of the vast majority of Israelis. Israeli violence isn't the product of Netanyahu. Netanyahu is the product of Israeli violence. He built his political career upon sentiments that were already in place. They'll also tell themselves fairy tales about a two-state solution to make their position seem more valid, ignoring inconvenient facts like that Israeli officials have been openly saying a Palestinian state will never happen.
This is what they do. This is like what AOC and the progressive do with selling Medicare for all when Joe Biden explicitly says he's going to veto it. You're talking about, the United States is talking about a two-state solution, and progressives in particular, talking about a two-state solution when the government explicitly says they're not going to do that. This is what makes them weak. How do you say, I'm advocating for Medicare for all? I'm going to put it in terms that we understand. I'm advocating for Medicare for all through this team, and the team is called We Don't Want Fucking Medicare for All. Social Democrats, let's continue.
That Israeli Jews overwhelmingly oppose such a measure, and that Israeli settlements are being built in Palestinian territories with the explicit goal of making a future two-state solution impossible.
Right.
Liberals subscribe to these fantasies as a kind of cognitive pacifier, which allows them to relax and feel okay with themselves, despite the fact that they are not actually endorsing any viable path toward justice.
All these little carve-outs they have is for them to appear left, them to appear compassionate, them to appear all of these things, but you're fine with the establishment structure, the establishment overarching point. Such a great point by Caitlin. I'll let her make it again. I think it was right around here.
Future two-state solution impossible. Liberals subscribe to these fantasies as a kind of cognitive pacifier, which allows them to relax and feel okay with themselves, despite the fact that they're not actually endorsing any viable path toward justice.
Right. So let's put it in terms of the United States. It's that we're living in a slave state, and they're going, well, let's get the slaves more time off. Let's get them this. Let's get them this, without ever saying let's end slavery, because that's too hard of a mountain to climb for a social democrat. Let's continue.
And to be clear, this isn't just what liberals do with regard to Israel-Palestine. It's their whole entire position on everything. Yes. On every issue, their position is little more than maintain the status quo, but make it pretty and psychologically comfortable for me. They never want to do what's right. They just want to feel like they are right. Theirs is an imperialist, militarist, tyrannical, oligarchic ideology with a bunch of feel-good social justice bumper stickers slapped on top of it. A boot on your neck and a flower in its hair. That's who liberals are. It's who they've always been. Phil Ox released the song Love Me, I'm a Liberal in 1966, and they haven't changed one iota ever since. The issues change, their arguments change, but their maintain the status quo but let me feel nice about it values system has remained exactly the same for generations.
Mm-hmm.